Imagine that your feet haven't dried in 3 months, that you sleep next to a decomposing corpse because there's no better place, that when it rains, and it rains a lot, the trench turns into a river of mud, blood, and excrement. Imagine that you have lice, thousands of lice, everywhere, and that rats, fat from eating the dead, run across your face while you try to sleep. Now imagine that you need to fight, not against the enemy, against all of this, because the enemy sometimes is the least of your worries. Welcome to 1916, the Western Front, the trench warfare, the place where more soldiers died from infection than from bullets, the place where hell had an address. Today, you will spend a day there, and you won't forget it. World War I began in 1914 with the idea that it would be quick. A playful war, they said. It ends at Christmas. But in November, the armies buried themselves, and they remained buried for 4 years. 4 years along a 700-kilometer line from the North Sea to the Swiss border. 4 years of digging, digging, digging. The trenches weren't simple holes. They were labyrinths. Complex systems of galleries, shelters, command posts, machine gun nests. The front line was where the soldiers kept watch. Behind, connecting galleries led to the rear. The Germans dug the best ones, the deepest, the most comfortable. The French, the worst, because they believed they would advance. They didn't. The trenches were damp, dark, cramped. The wooden ceilings frequently collapsed. Mud clung to boots like cement. There was barbed wire everywhere. And between the enemy trenches, no man's land. A lunar field full of grenade craters, uncollected bodies, and wires that cut like razors. Going to no man's land was almost always a death sentence. But staying in the trench was too. Because the trench wasn't a shelter, it was a trap of mud, disease, and despair. A French lieutenant in Verdun wrote in his diary, "Humanity is crazy. Hell can't be that bad." What was worse? The mud. Always the mud. When it rained, and in France it rained all the time, the trenches flooded. The water accumulated at the bottom, sometimes up to the soldiers' chests. The tunnels turned into rivers, and the soaked uniforms wouldn't dry. For weeks, for months. Trench foot, an infection caused by the constant dampness. Their feet would turn white, swollen, and numb. Then the skin would begin to peel. Then gangrene. The flesh would rot alive. The smell of gangrene was so distinctive that soldiers learned to recognize it from meters away. Gangrene killed slowly. The infection would climb up the leg. The soldier felt his flesh rotting while still alive. Many preferred the bullet. The bullet was quick.
Gangrene was a death that took days. And the mud wasn't just water. It was sewage mud, from overflowing latrines, from decomposing bodies, from human and animal excrement. The soldiers called it trench soup, and they lived in it, ate in it, slept in it. Their feet wouldn't dry. 3 months, 6 months. The English soldier Robert Graves described it in his memoirs. "We lived like worms, buried in the filth." And it wasn't just the dampness, it was the cold. The winter of 1916 was one of the harshest of the century. The mud froze overnight and thawed during the day, forming an icy puddle that the soldiers called death jelly. Feet turned black, gangrene spread. Amputations were performed without anesthesia, using wooden saws. Screams echoed through the trench, and no one could do anything. French Lieutenant Louis Bartas wrote, "I saw men with feet so rotten that the flesh fell off the bones when they took off their boots." But the mud was only the beginning, because for the soldiers, there were two invisible enemies, rats and lice. The rats of the trenches, they were enormous, fat from eating the corpses that weren't collected. They reproduced at an alarming rate. They ran freely through the shelters, the blankets, the backpacks. Robert Graves, the English poet who served in the trenches, told a story that would chill anyone's blood.
A new officer arrived at the front. On the first night, he heard a noise. He pointed his flashlight at the bed, and he found two rats fighting over a severed hand of a soldier, and the rats were fighting over it. The soldiers tried to kill the rats for sport. They stabbed them with bayonets. They shot at them, but the rats were faster. They hid in the cracks and returned when the soldiers slept. They gnawed on communication wires. They gnawed on electrical cables. They gnawed on everything. Equipment losses caused by rats in some units reached thousands of dollars. And the lice. The lice. A French soldier in 1916 described the siege war against lice. He wrote that the poilu, the French soldier, recognized three enemies in descending order of importance: the louse, the rat, and the German. The German was the least dangerous. Lice lived in the seams of uniforms, thousands of them. They bit day and night. Soldiers scratched until they bled. Wounds became infected. And worst of all, lice transmitted typhus. Typhus killed more soldiers than bullets. Soldiers learned to live with the lice. They would exchange shirts amongst themselves, lice shirts they called them, and pay 3 francs for a large louse for amusement. They would smash them against the trench walls, but they always came back. The German soldier Erich Maria Remarque, in his book All Quiet on the Western Front, wrote, "Lice are worse than artillery. You can hide from artillery.
From lice, you can't."
And the food? The food was a bad joke. Soldiers ate canned rations, hard bread, corned beef that soldiers called old horse meat. When the supply was not enough, they ate what they could. Rats? Yes, they ate rats, because hunger doesn't choose. The water was worse. Water came from nearby wells, but the wells were contaminated by decomposing corpses. Soldiers drank dirty water. They put chlorine tablets in to try to purify it, but it didn't work. Dysentery was widespread. Soldiers died of dysentery. They died of pneumonia. They died of typhus. They died of gangrene. They died from everything except bullets. Historians estimate that in World War I, more soldiers died from disease than in combat. On the Western Front, the death rate from disease was 50% in some units. Half the soldiers dead from infections. They died from diseases that today would be cured with antibiotics. But back then, there was no penicillin. There were no medications. There was only slow death. And the smell. The smell that no one ever forgets. The smell of the trenches was a mixture of rotting mud, human excrement, burning flesh, gunpowder, and decomposing bodies. The soldiers described it as a smell that stuck to their skin, their clothes, their soul. You could smell a trench from miles away, and when you walked in, the smell was so strong that you vomited. Until you get used to it. Until I don't feel anything anymore. But you never really got used to it. You just learned to ignore it.
French soldier Jean Guionneau wrote, "The smell of the trenches is the smell of death, not of quick death, of slow death, of death that rots before it arrives."
And when the soldiers weren't fighting mud, rats, lice, hunger, and thirst, they were being bombarded. Artillery was the queen of war. Shells fell day and night. The soldiers called it a meat grinder. A 150mm shell could destroy an entire trench. The shrapnel cut through flesh like knives.
The dead and wounded piled up. Those who survived were temporarily deaf, many forever. German officers used artillery as a psychological weapon. They fired non-stop for hours, not to kill, but to drive the soldiers mad. The noise was so intense that the soldiers lost all sense of time. They didn't know if it was day or night. They didn't know if they were alive or dead. The English soldier Wilfred Owen, who died in the war, wrote a poem about it. The noise of artillery is the sound of hell, and hell has no clock. And the gases. Mustard gas, chlorine gas, phosgene gas. The Germans used gas for the first time in 1915, and then everyone used it. The gas burned the skin. It burned the lungs. Soldiers who didn't put on their masks in time suffocated. Those who survived were left with respiratory problems for the rest of their lives. Mustard gas was the worst. It didn't kill immediately. It burned the skin from the inside. Blisters formed in the lungs. Soldiers coughed up blood. It took days to die. Days of agony. Days of regret. But the worst wasn't the gas. The worst was the waiting. Soldiers spent days, weeks, waiting for the next attack, hearing the whistling of grenades, knowing that at any moment a fragment could arrive, that the next breath could be their last. Fear was so paralyzing that some soldiers went insane. Shell shock, they called it. Grenade shock. Today, we call it post-traumatic stress. Back then, they shot soldiers who refused to go to the front. Cowardice, desertion. They were shot by their own colleagues. The war wasn't against the enemy. The war was against fear, and fear often won.
What was a typical day like in 1916? A soldier would wake up before dawn, in the dark, in the mud, with wet feet, covered in lice. He would put on his uniform, grab his rifle, and go to the front line. The watch lasted for hours. He observed no man's land, waiting for the enemy's movement. The wind carried the smell of bodies. Rats scurried past. He heard the whistles of grenades on the horizon and prayed that none would fall nearby. In the afternoon, the attack. "Get out of the trenches!" the officers shouted. The soldiers jumped. They ran towards the German lines. The machine guns opened fire. The soldiers fell like flies. Those who survived reached the barbed wire and were trapped. The German snipers shot at them like targets on a firing range. At night, the wounded screamed. They screamed for help. They screamed for water. They screamed for their mothers. No one could help them. Leaving the trench was suicide. They stayed there, in no man's land, bleeding, until the next morning. Many didn't make it to morning alive. The survivors returned to the trench. They changed shifts. They rested in the shelters. They listened to the rats. They crushed the lice. They drank dirty water. They ate canned rations. And they prayed to survive another day. That was life in the trenches. That was 1916. And it lasted 4 years. The German soldier Ernst Junger wrote in his diary, "Every day is a victory. Every night is a miracle. And every morning is a rebirth. Until the day you are not reborn." World War I killed 20 million people, 10 million civilians, 10 million soldiers. But numbers don't tell the story. The story is in the feet that wouldn't dry for 3 months, in the rats that fought over severed hands, in the lice that transmitted typhus, in the gangrene that rotted the raw flesh.
The soldiers of the First World War were not heroes. They were boys. Many were 18 years old, 19 years old, 20 years old. They were sent to hell with the promise that the war would end at Christmas. Christmas 1914, Christmas 1915, Christmas 1916, Christmas 1917, Christmas 1918. For many, Christmas never came. Today, the trenches are covered in grass. The grenade holes have become lakes. The battlefields have become tourist attractions. But the memory was not buried. It is there. In the accounts. In the diaries. In the letters that the soldiers wrote home and that were never delivered. The trench warfare was not a war of heroes. It was a war of survivors. And the survivors often didn't return unscathed. In 1916, a French soldier wrote, "Humanity is mad. Hell can't be that bad." He was right. Hell was there, in a trench in France, with mud, rats, lice, and gangrene. And in the end, what remained was the question no one answered. Why?